I need to do some hero research. A bright idea.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Craft of the Cards. This is a show primarily focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, examining the aesthetics of their art, the card's name, and how it relates to the effect. Last time, we finished off with the Elemental Hero main deck monsters, so this time we'll be moving on to the fusion monsters and spells. So, without further ado, let's yell out some Japanese and get started with Elemental Heroes, Part 2. Elemental Hero Mariner is their first fusion monster and is pretty strange, all things considered. The design is pretty out there, with it seeming very alien, the mask covering a lot of the face and the beak-like nose with the red eyes dehumanizing him quite a lot. I'm honestly not a fan, considering the materials being Avian and Bubbleman. It doesn't really seem to take after elements of either. You could argue that the bird-like beak is a reference to Avian, but it seems to make little sense, especially considering that Avian is a very human-looking card, barring the wings. The way it's posed seems strange as well, with the pose seeming to imply that it's on the ground, crouching down, but the angle that it's posed at, especially in relation to the background, just makes it seem like it's flying out to the bottom left. It's really strange, and despite some elements like the sailor pattern cape, which, while not exactly cool or amusing enough to warrant a laugh, it doesn't really do much to be an interesting or good card. The effect is also quite strange, and overall, the card just seems kind of out of place. None of the other cards are as alien or creepy as this one is, so it just seems a bit out of nowhere. It does get a 4 out of 10 though, mostly because there are other cards in the archetype which are much worse when it comes to actually relating to the effect, so the strange design and weird choices merely take it to below average instead of bad. The next monster is Elemental Hero Steam Healer, a combination of Burstinatrix and Bubbleman. I can kind of see how this works as a fusion, the gadget-based nature of Bubbleman meeting the fires of Burstinatrix to create this card. The design is nice, the large bolts and bulky mechanical arms with the cloth in between the giant slabs of metal all creates a very stripped back industrial sort of feel, something that makes sense considering that steam was the driver of industry. I like it quite a lot. The bulky industrial feel adds a lot of character to the card, with a lot of the other designs being much more fantastical. I'm not a big fan of the color scheme though. The light purple doesn't match that well with the red in my opinion, and makes the card a bit too light. Not in the light way as in bright, but when it comes to superheroes, I expect bright, bold, primary colors rather than these stripped back shades of them. The effect is really nice though, the exact opposite of Wingman, which shares a material with this monster. It's a nice touch, so this card gets a 6 out of 10. Despite a disappointing color scheme and boring background, it does have a really nice design and an excellently thematic effect. Their next card is a really interesting fusion of Wildheart and Necroshade, Elemental Hero Necroid Shaman. While a tad simplistic in the name, it combines very well the barbarian elements of Wildheart with the strange corruptive elements of Necroshade. The most obvious element of Necroshade on the design is the hair, taking on the exact same shade as Necroshade's body, and the mask with lines around the face. Interestingly enough though, the design takes mostly after a Japanese monk, with the rope obi around the waist and arms, and the kakara staff, the 6 rings indicating that he is of a rank of Buddha Vista. I think that's how it's pronounced. Please don't wreck me in the comments too bad. I like the pose as well. It's dynamic, with the arms and legs all in motion, similar to the exaggerated motions of No Theater. The background is kind of boring though, but works well enough with the card. It's dark enough to contrast well with the art. The effect is really nice as well, the resurrection effect working well with his mystical nature, so this card gets a 7 out of 10. It's a really nice card. It takes a lot of elements, blends them together really well to create a truly unique and interesting piece of art. Next up, we have Elemental Hero Mudballman, a fairly generic monster that combines Bubbleman and Clayman into a massive defensive wall. It works well with the name, the rounded blobby design making it seem less imposing than the blocky angular one of Clayman, but still solid nonetheless. It is a fairly generic design though, it's just balls of mud slapped together, which while it fits with the name isn't exactly going to, you know, blow my pants off. Also, I have no idea why the background is all fiery for this card. You would have thought that this would not want to turn back into clay, as it were. The effect is also pretty lackluster and generic, just being a restrictor on the summoning. It's a pretty boring card. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. While not the best in terms of effect and background, it does communicate very well the fact that this is just a big beefy defensive wall, which I do like when regarding the concept of the character. Elemental Hero is the next card, and it's interesting. I like the concept behind it, with a combination of Necroshade and Sparkman, resulting in this dark bodysuit with these massive golden wings and accessories. My only issue comes with a weird color scheme, more specifically with a purple stripe down his chest and the weird bands on his legs. They don't really match with the rest of the card, and I would have liked to see the red on the sides be more prominent. They contrast much better in my opinion, and make the card much more visually interesting, as it's a much better callback to Necroshade as well, in terms of the shade of the red. In the end, the colors make the card look much too busy, which it definitely is. I mean, look at those weird thigh things, but it definitely doesn't help it in the end. The effect is fairly boring, but standard, and I like the background with a weird negative lightning floating around it, helping to emphasize the name. It gets a 4 out of 10. While it's competent in some areas, the core design is overly busy and strangely colored, so it's a below average card at best. Elemental Hero Rampart Blaster has 2 separate arts. The difference is slight at best. However, the difference does factor into my decision somewhat, given that the TCG version has these weird toy light looking things over the gun, while the Japanese version just lets it be a gun that shoots out magma and hate. It makes a difference here, mostly because it makes the card seem weirder in the TCG, seem to make it try and heat up things by light instead, which doesn't really fit with this. I do like how the name works with the art though, the shield and blocky design reinforcing Clayman's body turning to metal, powering it up into a sturdier version, while Burstinatrix lends her motif to the helmet and overall gender of the monster. Beyond that, it's a sturdy card with a big cannon and a shield, designed to be destroying large fortifications. I like this card a lot. The background effect and art are all pretty good, so the OCG version gets a 7 out of 10 and the TCG version gets a 6 out of 10. Honestly, in the end, the TC version it reduces the card, makes it seem less imposing, less like what its job is supposed to be, and just turns it into this weird toyetic action figure looking thing. Elemental Hero Flame Wingman is Jaden's original ace monster and one of my favorite elemental heroes. He's got a really nice design, Burstinatrix combining to make the dragon head for an arm and a tail. It's really cool with this spiky edginess just screaming GX from every pore. While the background is somewhat disappointing with a weird green-yellow color, the effect is lovely, reflecting the burning nature of the card, Burstinatrix's fire and Avion's wind combining to create this powerful Inferno. I do love the design of the solitary wing as well. The mismatched nature looks really cool and shows a very clear distinction between the Burstinatrix and Avion parts of the card. They did really well on the color scheme for this as well. Red and green can look a bit too Christmassy to be used normally, but they managed to break it up enough and used a darker shade of green and red to make it seem less festive and much more like it is just a straight up combination of the 2 cards. In the end, I like it a lot. This gets an 8 out of 10, brought down only from a 9 out of 10 by a lacking background. I'm not actually a huge fan of Elemental Hero Phoenix Enforcer, mostly for the fact that it just seems too derivative of Avion. While elements from Burstinatrix exist, I don't see as obvious of a reference or anything as cool as the dragon's head. There just seems to be a beefier version of Avion with swords on his hand instead of the gauntlet with the claws, and his muscles drawn in such a way that it looks like he has more of those than he does brain cells. I also don't like the head on this one. It's almost too curved and organic to go with the rest of the design, which screams spikes at every opportunity. The effect is also lackluster, merely being a simple protection effect that doesn't really do much to help the theming of the card, so in the end, it gets a 6 out of 10. While the theming is there and it does attempt to combine both of its elements well, it doesn't do much to make it interesting like Flame Wingman does with the dragon heads, merely enhancing elements of the original card. Elemental Hero Gaia is a decent card. The black and orange contrast each other very well, with the orange stud standing out and the silver bronze trim helping to set the entire thing off very nicely. Its pose is nice as well, looming over the viewer, and the oversized arms and legs help it to seem very bulky, with overlapping plates and thickly armored chests and head. The background is really nice as well, with the ground splintering underneath his power while the background light blooms, showing the card seeming to bring the dawn. The effect is somewhat out there, but the card is decent overall, so it gets a 6 out of 10. It's a competent card despite a lackluster effect, and everything else is there, so it is slightly above average. Elemental Hero Thunder Giant's a really nice card, all things considered. While the physical effects of the card, the visual effects, look somewhat dated now, and I'm not a fan of how it clashes with the green background, the overall design is pretty good, combining the bulky, rounded frame of Clayman with the smooth lines and angular aspects of Sparkman. Admittedly, the ratio of upper torso to lower body is a bit strange this time, with the upper body being massively out of proportion with the legs, but for a more exaggerated form, it might work. The purple and yellow do work well together, with the white trim helping to set it off nicely. I'm a bit hesitant on approving the pauldrons though, as I think the white's a bit too prominent there. It should have had a more direct yellow on the spikes, and I think more of the yellow would have worked nicely. As it is, the yellow looks almost like a secondary color there, which is quite strange. The effect is decent, however, with it blowing up a monster, as one could reasonably expect from a lightning-powered golem. In the end, it gets a 7 out of 10, good enough with some nice elements, despite a background that clashes with some unfortunate visual effects. Elemental hero Wild Wingman's probably one of the most hilarious instances of censorship I've ever seen in a card. They were so terrified about what he represented in the TCG that they gave him more coverings in order to prevent that furry banana hammock he's wearing from being the sole bit of covering on his legs. I laughed for about 5 minutes straight after I found that one out, honestly. The difference is negligible to the art though, so I won't talk about it too much. The artworks, aside from that bit of ridiculousness, is good, being a fairly obvious fusion of Avian and Wildheart with the wings and changed arms and legs adding onto him. The effect also represents a fusion of their two abilities, with Feather Wind and Cyclone Boomerang both being back row hate. It's a fine enough card, and I like the addition to the black to the tips of the wings. It gives them a nice bit of presence, and it helps to give this card a more tribal feeling. In the end, it gets a solid 7 out of 10, it's pretty awesome. Elemental hero Inferno is a combination of Heat and Lady Heat in the same vein as Robo Yaru and Robo Lady, being a male-female version whose effect causes its attack to raise by 1000. Speaking of the attack, it's a nice shout out to the original cards this monster is made of, because this monster's attack is the same as the combined attack of Heat and Lady Heat. It's a nice callback and a nice bit of symmetry, and I quite like it. While the overall design is good, fitting in with the later aesthetic of the Elemental Hero monsters is more Kamen Rider or Super Sentai inspired than anything else, with the ridiculous pauldrons and clean design, the hole in the middle of the chest is strange to me. It seems to serve no purpose, unless Inferno can shoot fire blasts out of the center of his chest like Iron Man. The background is fairly generic, and the overall card is quite nice. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a good, if slightly confusing design at times, combined with a decent effect and fairly standard background. Their next card, Elemental Hero Absolute Zero, is absolutely, see what I did there, stunning. I love the design of this card. The sleek angular look of the pauldrons and armor plates goes so well with the bodysuit underneath. Stark white and dark blue are excellent color combinations, and it works to great effect here, especially as he smashes into the ground in a massive display of ice. While certain elements of the design are a bit goofy, the fins on his arm and the belt that seems to extend from his body are a tad bit strange, the card looks sleek and deadly, and the cape— shut up, Edna— being really nice elements that add so much presence to the card. The effect is quite thematic, building off of a precedent established with Cold Wave, being a powerful back row nuke. This card gets an 8 out of 10, it's really awesome. I love it overall, with a cool, sleek design that just pops off the card and so many elements that are really interesting about it. Elemental Hero Escuridao, Portuguese for Shadow, is another pretty nice card. Seeming to be an upgraded version of Elemental Hero Shadow Mist, I really like how this card is visually indicative of the change in Yu-Gi-Oh's art style over the years. While this card is hilariously edgy, it doesn't go for the same edge that GX did, with GX often preferring a more realistic body proportions and then tricking it out with skulls, spikes, and spine until it became visually cluttered all to hell. Making them seem monstrous, it continued the original Yu-Gi-Oh's design of not having necessarily attractive monsters, but having ones that were monstrous looking. While busy card design is nothing new to Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole, they're now capable of putting relatively restrained cards as well, instead of pushing everything towards the extreme range of edge. In any case, the sleek, insubstantial, twisted design of this card is really cool, if massively impractical, like most cards with this level of edge are. The blades on the waist, along with the teeth across the chest, are hilarious for their impracticality, and the twisted design of the wings make this whole thing look insubstantial, like blades can form out of everything. The outline in blue flame does its job well and contrasts nicely to the black, while the occasional bursts of white along the body, along with the glowing eyes, help to break up the card a bit more. It's really cool, mostly because I have a soft spot for that sort of edge. The effect is suitable as well, gaining power from the number of E-heroes you have in your grave, the darkness powering up from death. The background is a tad disappointing though, merely going for a more chaotic red design in order to emphasize his edge rather than anything more interesting. It's a good card though, and thereby gets a 7 out of 10, an interesting, if overly edgy design combined with a good thematic effect and a slightly boring background. Elemental Hero Shining Flare Wingman is an upgraded version of Flame Wingman, combining with Sparkman in order to get a sweet suit of armor. It's rather over the top, but it's still pretty cool. The helmet going on over the face with the red gem, the green, white, and gold all working very well together. I like the wings on the back as well, the enhanced nature of them falling back on the blade-like wings that are so often a staple of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Aesthetic. One element I'm emphatically not a fan of, though, is the weird blob thing that took the place of the Dragonon. It looks like a pile of shit. I mean, honestly, you could have had a massive gold-plated dragon's head, and instead you went with a weird blobby spike thing. I'm not really a fan of the rounded spikes in general. I would have preferred to see a bit more edge on the thing. The attack is really cool, though. The fact that when this has 4 elemental heroes in the grave, it equals the combined attack of Flame Wingman and Sparkman is a really cool thing. It's a really nice touch that helps it a lot. The background is also pretty good this time, the light bursting out from behind him matching its name. Unfortunately, it can only get a 6 out of 10. While there are elements to like about this card, especially in the attack theming and effect, both being upgraded copies of the original, it fails to do enough with the design to reach higher peaks, and the rounded design of some of the elements and the strange decision to eliminate the dragon's head means that this card is merely above average. Elemental Hero Shining Phoenix Enforcer is somehow even more disappointing, taking everything that was meh about Phoenix Enforcer and dialing it up to 100. This is everything that was disappointing about Phoenix Enforcer: the lack of a truly interesting design, the failure to incorporate anything truly interesting into its palette. It's just bad. Instead of something more interesting, we get more enhanced claws from Avion, the blade wings, and a ridiculous spiked crown helmet that just... it's not good. The effect is once again pretty lackluster, being a protection-oriented effect and does nothing to help the card at all. A strange decision to keep the green bodysuit more prominent instead of covering it up with armor like what Shining Flare Wingman did is strange as well. I'm not really a fan of how it looks, and in the end, it gets a 4 out of 10. This card is honestly disappointing for a variety of reasons, from an uninspired design to a lackluster effect. Next up, we have this Frieza-looking motherfucker, Elemental Hero Terra Firma. One of the legendary planets in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX manga, it's a fusion of ocean and woodsman, making sense that it would then represent the Earth. I would like to know where the hell it got any elements from woodsman and ocean, though. It looks totally different from them, and looks like a completely different beast altogether. Beyond that, it's pretty boring, although it does remind me a little bit of the early anime design of robots, all pure white androids with vaguely human faces. The background is really nice this time as well, though, with the Earth behind him. Not a fan of the effect, though. It doesn't really have much to do with the Earth, in my opinion. In the end, this card gets a 5 out of 10. While the background is good, the design and the effect are somewhat lackluster, but not enough to push it below average. Its one support card is Terra Firma Gravity. It's a trap card which depicts 5 monsters spiraling down to Earth. The art is actually really nice this time. I love the shot of Earth, and the spiraling lines of red as they map out the trajectory of the monsters is a nice touch and adds some color to the card. The effect is quite similar to Battle Mania, causing all monsters to attack, and matches very well with the name, the gravitational pull of the planet, making monsters attack Terra Firma. It works very well overall, and it's a decent enough card, so it gets a 6 out of 10. Elemental Hero The Shining looks really alien, but also really cool. I have it on some authority that certain elements are shared with some Gundams, but I'm not sure how much that's just conventions of Japanese design, and how much of it is deliberate evocation. In any case, the design for the card is really awesome, with the white and gold working beautifully together, with the red gems acting as really good spots of color to prevent the card from looking too washed out. I love how we can't see his face either, the cyclopean red gem in the center acting as an alien eye watching over us. The ring on his back and the golden blades is also really cool, acting to make him seem much more imposing by giving him a large silhouette. The effect also acts as a contrast to Escuriado, his drawing strength from monsters in the grave, while Shining draws power from banishing, fitting in with certain themes among light monsters and fairy-type monsters in particular. It's a really nice card. It gets a 7 out of 10. It has a competent design with a cool effect along with a well thought out color scheme that make it really good. Elemental Hero Nova Master is the next card and has a really strange pose. While most of it's okay, the leaping motion making sense, given the rather excellent background, seeming to imply that he's jumping out of the caldera of a volcano or some other suitably fireplace. However, the weird placement of his left arm kind of ruins it. I have no idea why it's held in that position. I feel like if they wanted to have his hand on fire, then it would have been better to have his other hand lit up and that hand on fire, bracing it. In any case, it's not a huge thing, but I did notice it, so I felt like I had to comment on it. Otherwise, while the card is good, it has a cape, which is always good for me, and the design is suitably flame-like with the pauldrons and headpiece all shaped like tongues of fire along with the knee pads and gauntlets. The red, yellow, and orange work well together, and the black bodysuit underneath helps to add some nice contrast to the card as a whole. As I said before, the background is really nice on this one, actually having some stuff in it. The effect is somewhat lackluster though. I feel like literally any other effect than a drawing one could have worked. In the end, it gets a 7 out of 10 as well. While some small elements of the design and a lackluster effect prevent it from achieving a higher score, the overall design and excellent background help it out a lot. Elemental Hero Wild Edge is a very obvious fusion of Wild Heart and Blade Edge, and it looks cool enough, but it's also the laziest possible design they could have chosen for this card. They basically just chopped the card into quarters, placed parts of the design on diagonal so that the top right and bottom left are Blade Edge inspired, and the top left and bottom right are Wild Heart inspired. One thing that annoys me the most is that this is one of the only Wild Heart fusions that has no tattoos, mainly going with a large number of belts scattered across literally every available surface. People give Kaiba shit for having an excess number of belts on his outfit, but this is a bit too much. For fuck's sake, even has some belts going across his helmet. The sword is also massive, with the guard poking out at all angles. It's faintly ridiculous with the blades along the arm and the shoulder pad. While ridiculous though, it's not bad, it's just lazy. I'm not a fan of the effect. The multiple attacking doesn't really work to seem like an extension of Wild Heart or Blade Edge in any way. The background is also pretty stock and boring, so this card gets a 4 out of 10. It's below average because it's lazy. I don't see anything in this card that made me think that the artist cared, just that they were told, make a fusion of Wild Heart and Blade Edge, and do it quickly. Elemental Hero Plasma Vise is a pretty interesting card until you actually start looking at it. While on the surface it looks pretty cool, the golden elements of Blade Edge combining with Sparkman's in order to create a really oversized, powerful looking cards with the massive arms and armor, when you look closer, it starts to look more goofy than anything else. The chest place is the first place to start, it being the seeming gaps in the armor making little sense, just kind of disappearing into darkness. The arms are the next part, seemingly designed around a battery lead with the ridged design on the back, which matches with the name, helping it seem like a vice of some kind, but is also more than a little stupid. Beyond that though, that design can't work. It looks like it would just slam down on his arm if it were to close. It's a shame though, because the color scheme works very well and the visual effects are nice and clear. The effect is also quite nice, taking the effect of Thunder Giant and adding Blade Edge's effect to it. It works really, really well. The background is once again bog standard and not very interesting though. So this card gets a 6 out of 10. The effect is really nice and the design can't be called anything other than goofy, which I don't think is the point at all. Elemental Hero Great Tornado is utterly terrible. Not from a background point, that's actually pretty nice for the card, helping to show off the card's power. I'm talking about the design and the color scheme. I swear, when I find out whichever idiot decided that the best thing to put on a perfectly good green and black bodysuit was yellow pads, I will execute them via 1,000 paper cuts. It just looks so bad. The shade of yellow they chose looks nearly orange and makes the entire card just covered with it. It's honestly such a baffling design choice on what otherwise could have been a very interesting and good card. On that front, there are elements I like about this card. I love how they chose to use the cape this time, more like a cloak than anything else. And the little details, like the lighting they put on the reflecting on the light around his fists, show that they knew what they were doing. However, things like the choice to put that orange-yellow everywhere, plus that kind of weird belt design that makes it look like he has an orange codpiece on, are just baffling to me. In the end, this gets a 4 out of 10. It's not great to look at. While the background is good, the effect and artwork are just subpar. I really do like Elemental Hero Tempest, mostly because it just works well as a card together. It's a combination of Avion, Sparkman, and Bubbleman, the air, lightning, and water all being reflected in the name, while the design takes on excellent elements from all three, admittedly more so from Avion and Sparkman than Bubbleman. The card is armored like Sparkman with blue and gold, with the green wings of Avion sprouting from his back, along with the claws along his arm, and the technology of Bubbleman seemingly seen in his left hand. If I do have a complaint though, it is that it draws more from Sparkman and Avion than Bubbleman, which is unfortunate, but it works well enough for the card. The effect doesn't really have a particular thematic resonance with Bubbleman's either, but considering that 2/3 of the cast in this card don't have any effects, I'm willing to somewhat let it slide, considering that there's not really a thematic continuation to go off of. I will say though, that a superhero monster having a protection effect is a pretty neat idea, and leave it at that. The background for this card though is great, with a natural looking light framing the monster heroically as he pushes towards the top left. It's a great card and gets an 8 out of 10, the good design, excellent background, and reasonably thematic effect with regards to the fact that he's a superhero. Thankfully, the next card, Elemental Hero Cora, is an upgraded version of Elemental Hero Terra Firma that addresses some of the issues I had with the card. It has more color and the design is more complete overall, but unfortunately sacrifices the rather excellent background. I'm not really sure why this is the one they chose to be more formidable though, considering that you would think that the core of the Earth would be lesser than the Earth itself. In any case, the effect is suitably powerful, and I like how it summons Terra Firma or any other level 8 or lower monster upon death. The background is pretty standard this time and pretty boring, and the pose is kinda strange. I'm not really sure if I like that super head-on, juggernauty pose. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. It's decent enough, with some good elements that bring it to about average. While theoretically, Elemental Hero Electrum is pretty cool, being a final fusion of 4 different elemental heroes, it really doesn't look good. The design for this card is pretty terrible. The proportions are kind of horrifying, with the waist being about the size of his wrist, and the strange use of yellow and white, meaning that he looks like someone's snow art. The way they chose to use the highlight of white on his chest also makes it look like someone shaped a shamrock to his chest rather than him having actual muscles. His mouth also looks super shitty, being this weird like fish lip looking design, and his underwear just looks weird. I get why Superman wears his undies on the outside. He can pull it off because he's Superman and because it helps to break up the otherwise uniform blue color of his outfit, though the new 52 design did a pretty good job without it. Also, the reason it's not good on him is that it looks like it is pulled super tight. The effect is also pretty good. The fact that he's made from water, wind, fire, and earth reflects in the fact that he's empowered by them on the field, and I like that he gets all the other monsters from the Banish Zone back to the deck. This is mostly just due to the effect that it had versus Dr. Banner. I like it especially because this one actually considers the elemental aspects of the elemental heroes. The background, though, is fairly lackluster. While I like the idea of it, the 4 elements combining in separate areas, it only really has 3 visible ones, with the fire taking up an outsized portion. In the end, it gets a 4 out of 10. It has a good effect, but the design is honestly pretty garbage, so it's a below average card. Alright, so we'll be covering 4 cards at once here, all the hero cards: H Heated Heart, E Emergency Call, O Oversoul, and R Righteous Justice. All the cards have fairly boring art, but competent enough for what they are. I can't really fault the cards for being as they are considering their names. H Heated Heart just being a fiery H, E Emergency Call being an explosion behind an E, O Oversoul having supernatural flames around it, and R Righteous Justice is the only one that's mildly weird, but I understand that it's kind of hard to visually represent righteousness, so they just went with a starburst. The massive explosion of red is okay as it contrasts to the gold R, but the background is pretty meh. The effects all do match very well though: H Heated Heart increasing attack, Emergency Call searching, Oversoul working with the graveyard, and Righteous Justice destroying spells and traps. They all get a 6 out of 10. Good cards with nice elements, but nothing too spectacular. Hero Flash is the card that gets formed once you've used up all the hero cards and looks like about what you'd expect. It's the letters of the cards formed up into Hero, with the blinding light spilling out of the background. I do like the rainbow of colors in the background. They all look really good and reflect the different nature of each elemental hero. The effect is also decent, allowing for a special summon from the deck and then all of your monsters being able to attack correctly. A nice effect for all the setup that it takes to get this card working, and the fact that this is meant to be a big finisher. It gets a 6 out of 10. Don't expect much from a card like this, and it does well enough by my standards, so it gets slightly above average. Fifth Hope is their next spell card, and a really nice one art-wise. It's an ensemble shot of the elemental heroes, with Clayman's bulk in the background, while Sparkman, Burstinatrix, and Avion stand around, and Bubbleman takes a knee. There are 2 arts for this card, Burstinatrix's Sinful Flesh apparently being too much for the American censors once again, and once again, it's nothing big enough to change the grades. The shot is nice enough. It's simple but showing them off well, while the moon is in the background highlighting them. I like how we get to see the scale of cards like Clayman as compared to the other cards as well. It looks really nice, and the effect is pretty awesome as well, acting as a massive comeback card with it drawing you 3 cards if you're deep in the shit. It's nice enough to match with a name requiring 5 E heroes and then giving you some hope off the draw. It's a good card which gets a 7 out of 10. Beyond that, it's a clean card overall, and a lot of elements about it work well together. Fake Hero is an interesting card, mostly for the art rather than anything else. It's censored with 2 arts, and the thing they censored? Was it some horrifying poster in the background depicting sex? Was it some immature thing a Japanese artist slipped in that got around QA? No, it's the guy's underwear. It's just underwear, guys. We got him, I swear. It's the most arbitrary shit that gets fucked with in the TCG. I actually do quite like the card's art though. The dramatic action line showing as the guy hurriedly strips out of his clothes to try and get into his goofy looking costume is quite funny, showing the bit of superheroing that often doesn't get a lot of attention, with Clark Kent just ducking into a phone booth and everybody else, well, aside from Joel Schumacher, just kind of suiting up. The effect matches well with the name, the hero being summoned not being able to attack or do much of anything, and then scarpering when the going gets tough. It gets a 7 out of 10, with the comic nature of the card matching well with its seeming effectuality, at least until Exceed Summoning became a thing, and this card suddenly became very, very useful indeed. A Hero Lives is their next normal spell, and depicts Elemental Hero Woodsman coming to the aid of some guy on the ground as a dinosaur menaces him. Before we continue, a quick note on the name. There might have been a slight mistranslation, as the original Japanese name, this thing, may translate out to Hero Arrive, which might make a lot more sense given that this seems to be Woodsman arriving to protect a figure on the ground. In any case, my opinion on this card is mixed, with some elements that I like, the sun breaking through the clouds and highlighting his figure, while both the monster and the man behind Woodsman are cast in shadow, are really interesting, and it helps to make him seem very heroic as the central pillar of the art. However, I almost would have preferred it if the monster and the man in the background were actual, Yu-Gi-Oh cards of monsters, and I get that might have created some lore issues that could have made the entire thing a bit more weird, but it could have made it so much more interesting. I do wish that it'd be one of the evil heroes as well instead of a monster, as I really don't see how this fits into the theme of the E-heroes as a whole, especially with the strange desert-like background instead of a skyscraper or a city. The effect works with you paying life in order to summon out a hero from your deck, and makes a lot more sense with the Japanese name, a hero arriving from your deck. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 10. There are some good elements of this card, matched with some bizarre mistranslated ones in the TCG that bring it down from what could have been a higher grade, but in the end, keeping things as they are, it can only really get as low as an average grade. The next card is supposedly hero support, but why they didn't just choose to use a hero monster, I have no idea. In any case, Hero Heart depicts a knight on a blank field having arrows scattered around him clutching a broken sword. The art for this card is almost painfully lackluster without any bit of visual flair to distinguish it. The red cape helps, giving the card some presence, and the tattered and split edges help to emphasize its ragged nature. The pose helps as well, shoulder turns slightly... Alright, I give up. This card has no relation to the elemental hero archetype as a whole. This has no relation to any archetype as a whole. This could have been generic support, but no, it specifically mentions hero monsters. The one cool element of this card is in relation to the effect showing a direct attack but at half the attack of the original monster. It fits with the desperation in this card, and the fact that his sword is broken in half with him grasping the other half is a good way of symbolizing the effect, having it but having 2 attacks. The rest of this card is fairly meh though, and it can't get more than a 2 out of 10. This has no relation to the archetype as a whole. This barely has a relation to the E-heroes as a concept, and if it didn't mention them specifically, I wouldn't think this was support at all. Hero Mask is their next spell and looks pretty nice. It might actually have a pretty interesting story behind it as well if you're willing to stretch out a bit of effort. In my case, the art is pretty simple, being a shot of Avion's mask on a pedestal in a room. I do like that we see an actual background for this one though, and the mask itself is fairly cool to see up close. The effect is good and thematic, with it allowing you to have an elemental hero monster on the field, the name of an E-hero in the grave. My theory for the lore of this card though is that at some point, the original 5 E-heroes retired in favor of the newer monsters, and occasionally, someone goes to pick up Avion's mask in order to get the powers. In any case, it looks decent and has a good effect to it, so it gets a 5 out of 10. The art is fine, if unremarkable, and the effect is quite nice. Hero Bond is their next card, and once again, is a very competent card. Despite the lack of Bubbleman, which is an issue, it displays the bond between the heroes as they go for a big all-hands-in moment, with the differences between them clearly articulated. The effect works as well, with it allowing you to special summon out 2 more elemental heroes if you have one on the field, showing their bond. It's a pretty boring card once again, and while it would normally reduce the grade somewhat, the effect is pretty nice and the art isn't, terrible, so it gets a 5 out of 10. Miracle Fusion is their next card, and as a different E-hero specific variant of Poly, it works pretty well. It continues the theme of the polymerization cards, with the 2 monsters swirling around the center, but fitting with a new name, it seems to be a bright flash emanating from the background and getting refracted through the swirls, while the hero logo that we'll see in Hero Signal later on gets broadcast over the monsters. I do like how the figures have changed from the original Poly, not being a demon and a dragon anymore, but 2 very human figures, making sense considering that this is a hero card. Beyond that, the red and blue act as natural contrast to each other and show up well against the background. It's a good effect as well, fusing from beyond the grave would indeed be a miracle. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a good artwork and a competent effect. Parallel World Fusion continues this theme though, the card having 2 different figures from Miracle Fusion superimposed over a space background, with the 2 worlds in the background seeming to meet in some form of convergence. It's decent art, but matches very well with the effect, which uses banished monsters to fuse, the detritus of Miracle Fusion coming back to your dimension to be used once again. It gets a 7 out of 10. The art is really nice on this one, the background especially is quite excellent, and the parallels with Miracle Fusion along with the name give it a really nice bit of thematic consistency. I love the art for Skydive Scorcher. The silhouette of Wingman highlighted against the moon in the background. It looks great. The distinct silhouette with the wing on one side and the dragon head held over his chest is perfect and highlights him incredibly well against the sky. The background is lovely as well, the city stretched out below him. The effect is lovely, the effect being a massive field nuke compared with Flame Wingman's effect on the monster with the highest attack. But if this card is used with Skyscraper on the field, completing the art, then it destroys everything and burns for massive damage. It gets an 8 out of 10. This is a truly excellent thematic effect, combined with some pretty awesome art. Legacy of a Hero is a pretty decent card overall. It shows the dragon's head and wing of Flame Wingman in a spotlight. It's a simple art that works fairly well for the purpose of this card, showing the implements of other heroes and manages to impart a certain element of melancholy, his weapons, the wing and the dragon head, being the only thing left over. I would have liked to see a card showing the costumes of all the old E-heroes, but this conveys pretty similar things. The effect works as well, the legacy of the failed E-hero fusion monsters allowing you to get a pretty big +2. It gets a 6 out of 10, it's a pretty nice card with a pretty decent effect. Skyscraper is their first field spell and is pretty awesome. I love the idea of a dark city as night as a setting for superheroes, and the looming buildings with the spotlights going off along with the full moon in the corner gives this card so much presence. The dark colors contrast very well with the yellow lighting. It has a very big visual resemblance to New York with the Empire State looking building in the center. The effect is really nice as well, giving a nice underdog feeling, where if your monster is weaker, then it gets a pretty big attack boost. It's a good card and gets 7 out of 10. It has a really nice atmosphere that propels it beyond a 6 out of 10, but honestly only by a little bit. Skyscraper 2 Hero City is the upgraded form of Skyscraper, and for that, it looks quite good. Designed in the show by Chun-Li for Jaden, it looks like a very futuristic city with curved domes and tram lines everywhere. The colors are much lighter and warmer, being combinations of yellows and oranges along with the light blues, a marked contrast to the dark tones of the original Skyscraper card. The effect is very different from Skyscrapers though, which I'm not a fan of considering that this is supposed to be an upgrade. This time, the effect allows you to get an E-hero back from the grave. It actually fits quite well with the card, being a much more utopian view of heroes, being that their city is safe and thriving. It gets a 7 out of 10 though. While the overall tone is very different, and that does bring it down for me, it works very well as a more utopian version of Skyscrapers, with the heroes not even dying permanently, instead coming back in their usual comic book tomfuckery. Their first trap card is Change of Hero Reflector Ray. Was there a mistranslation here? I don't know, was there a mistranslation here? Because these words mean entirely nothing when put together. While the Reflector Ray part makes sense, the Change of Hero part doesn't. The art is fine enough, the massive ray of light crashing down on Sparkman, highlighting his figure, the lightning bolts coming off the sign are a nice touch, and the card overall is decent. The effect is the Reflector Ray part of this, burning your opponent for the level of an E-hero fusion monster that's destroyed. Though I will say that why they use Sparkman in the art is kind of weird instead. I would have expected them to use a fusion monster for this making sense. It does make a lot of sense though, given the Reflector Ray title, reflecting the attack back on their opponent. It only gets a 5 out of 10 though. It's decent art, and the effect makes sense with at least half of the name, but the other half is kind of weird. It doesn't change the hero any, and the fact that the art doesn't show off a fusion monster is honestly pretty disappointing. The next trap is Life Equalizer, and if it didn't have E-hero in the name, I would wonder what the fuck this has to do with the archetype at all. The art has no relation to the rest of the archetype, the name and effect match in a sense, but it doesn't really work at all. In the context of the rest of the archetype, this is a trash card. It gets a 1 out of 10. Their next trap is also, pretty disappointing. It's Hero Barrier. It's a weaker, archetypal version of Negate Attack. It also doesn't really have any connection to the hero theme in the art, merely just being this twirly, lightning-y vortex. The background is boring and black, and this card's just bad. This guy gets a 1 out of 10 as well. It has almost no relation to the archetype as a whole, and is just baffling in how lazy this art is. Hero Blast is their next support card and is much better than their previous cards, mostly due to the fact that this actually features E-heroes, and more specifically Sparkman. The background is pretty awesome this time, the beige streak springing up behind accompanying his rise out of the ground, the jagged edges seeming to indicate a great deal of power as the ground buckles beneath his force. The foreground is pretty nice as well, with the ground splitting open and spitting out Sparkman as electricity crackles from his frame. It looks pretty cool overall. The effect is what ties it together though, allowing you to get a normal E-hero back from the grave and then destroy a monster in the field whose attack is lesser. It makes the inclusion of Sparkman much cooler as he's a normal E-Hero monster. It's a really nice card overall and gets a 7 out of 10. Hero Counterattack is their next card, and once again features Sparkman. This card's somewhat weird though. I like that it's set in something, but the fact that it's called Hero Counterattack, it seems more confrontational, with Sparkman seeming to be waiting in an abandoned scrapyard. It's just kind of strange. It doesn't seem like what you'd want from a counterattack, which in my mind would seem different. Maybe the location is part of it though, like having to fight in such an unglamorous location? In any case, the effect is quite good, the counterattack coming through in terms of the destruction of the opponent's monster after yours gets destroyed. Though I don't really like how it's so random what your opponent chooses. It gets a 6 out of 10 though. It would be better if the art was more clear on the whole situation. Hero Signal is their next card, and is actually kind of cartoony, but it's fine enough, I guess. It's a clear reference to the bat signal, with the hero emblem being projected into the night sky. It works out fairly well, the city looking somewhat cartoony but still present in the background, which is a shame given the more realistic design of cards like Skyscraper. One of the things I do like about this card though is how gradiated the sky looks, the sky still lighting up but fading to black as we get further up. The effect is good as well, allowing for a hero to come out of the woodwork once it gets destroyed, and it gets a 5 out of 10, it's just decent all round. Hero Spirit has better artwork than Life Equalizer and Hero Barrier, but suffers from the same problem of literally having no visible connection to the archetype as a whole. The art is good this time though, the hero, with his ridiculous armor and helmet, getting ready to jump down into a horde of orc knockoffs. The background is nice, the sun over the red sky makes him look super imposing, but in the end, this card gets a 3 out of 10. This card has nothing to do with E-Heroes as a whole, and the effect, which is reducing battle damage if an E-Hero got destroyed, maybe makes sense if you consider a hero's obligation to protect people, but doesn't really work else. However, it's solidly below average because the art is good enough to rescue it from a 1 out of 10. The others was just disappointing most of the time, which made it get a terrible grade. Kid Guard is an incredibly morbid card. Hero Kid, a monster that I didn't include in the first episode because it was used all of 2 times by Jaden in the anime, has little connection otherwise with the rest of the archetype, features in its artwork. It has its arms raised above its head with a circular visual effect emanating from his stomach. It's pretty boring to be honest, and I'm not a massive fan. The reason it's so morbid though is that you actually kill a child in order to indicate its attack, as well as searching an E-Hero from the deck. It's actually kind of psychotic, child sacrifice in order to remain alive. In the end though, it's a 5 out of 10. The art is boring and functional and the effect works, so it's perfectly average. Mirror Gate is actually a really cool card. I love how this is designed, with the mirrors opening up like petals of a flower as they disappear into the distance. However, it once again doesn't have anything to do with E-Heroes, it doesn't have like an explicit connection to them, so I'm not a massive fan of it in relation to the rest of the archetype. The effect is once again really good though, allowing you to switch the targets of a battle around so that it is your opponent who takes the damage. It gets a 4 out of 10. I really like the art on this one, but I can't give it a higher grade because it's thematically so divergent with the rest of the archetype. This was a long archetype, guys, and my voice is kind of slowly starting to go. But Elemental Heroes are a really interesting archetype. They've been a fan favorite nearly since their inception, and they rely on an extra deck toolbox in order to get their monsters out. It's interesting to see how their art has shifted over time, with many different designs rounding out the cast to a truly staggering number of monsters and fusions. It's also more interesting to see how they were released in waves of support, with different monsters evolving over time from much more Western-based designs to more Kamen Rider or Super Sentai-inspired ones, a trend that would continue with the advent of masked heroes. I love a lot of the designs, and despite their lower quality of the art on some of the older fusions, they're generally a good archetype with interesting themes, and despite some particularly low-quality spells, they are generally speaking quite good. I have a lot of residual fondness for this archetype, mostly related to how I started Yu-Gi-Oh! Way back in the GOATS era. I love the show, and especially the E-Heroes, because I thought the concept of combining 2 heroes into a third, more awesome one was pretty kick-ass. This archetype as a whole gets a 7 out of 10. Despite some disappointing aspects, this has a lot of really solid and pretty awesomely designed cards that bring it above the average. My favorite card for this has to be Skydive Scorcher, mostly related to how Flame Wingman's my favorite fusion monster, and how this puts him in context, in something that just seems so cool, with him starkly standing out against the moon and just on that sky. It's a really cool card, guys. I really like it. In any case, something new next week, something not hero related. Maybe something I can get angry at. Yeah, that'll be good. In any case, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching the show. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. So without further ado, almost approaching 45 minutes, this is Nuke, signing out.